Welcome to the Unscripted podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. Today, we are going to be talking about the practice of painstorming and how it improves change leadership. I'm excited to welcome to the podcast today Jeffrey or Jeff Yip, who is an associate professor of management and organizational studies at Simon Fraser University. In addition to teaching leadership in the executive MBA and management of technology programs, he conducts research that addresses managerial challenges in work relationships and leading change and has contributed to resources like Harvard Business Review and Psychology Today. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sarah. Great to join you on this.
Yeah, so glad to have you. So before we get into our topic at hand, can you spend a couple of minutes just sharing anything else you would like about yourself, your work, before we get into our topic?
Yeah, so I teach, as you shared, that I teach leadership primarily in our executive MBA and in our executive programs. And in the last couple of years, focused primarily on technology leadership, doing programs with CIO Canada, working with technology leaders. And one of the central focus of my work has been helping technology leaders manage and lead change. With a central focus on listening to really understand the changing dynamics that are happening in our organizations today. So one of the my work converges in the recent years around a method that I've developed called listen and build. It's using listening as a discipline to understand organizational pain, to make connections, to mobilize communities around change, and to build based on what one hears from these conversations.
Wonderful. Well, as I shared with you before we began recording, change leadership and finding ways to effectively manage change is one of the most common challenges that our audience shares. So I know this will be very interesting to them. So, Jeff, I connected with you after hearing you speak late last year on Harvard Business Review's Future of Business virtual event. And your session had me thinking afterwards because we've had a number of conversations in recent history on this podcast talking about the art of storytelling. So, talking about how we need to be conscious of how we're communicating with different audiences. And for our audience, specifically, how that relates both to communicating upward in their organizations and then communicating with the front line. What your session brought to mind for me is just that there is this reality we maybe haven't talked about enough that if you're going to tell good stories, if you're going to be a good storyteller, you cannot do that without an understanding that can only be built by listening.
Yeah.
So your session, of course, focused on this art really of listening, science and art, I'm sure. And how that how that listening blends into the work you're doing, which is really helping companies think about what it takes to effectively navigate the level of change that everyone is experiencing today. I'm curious before we get into the organizational pain piece, just on listening overall, what, in your view, are the biggest barriers? Like, what keeps leaders from listening as much as they need to, or in the ways that they need to?
Yeah, that's great, Sarah. It's great to connect storytelling with listening. And the science of storytelling is when a story is shared between two people, there are really two stories that are happening at the same time. There's the story that's being told, and there's the story that's being received on the other end. And these are two different stories. And in the context of leadership and change, that one of the challenges with leadership is that leaders who live only in their story and they're telling their story of change. And the reason why that's not being received is there's no bridge to the other side.
Hmm.
And so our stories, the effectiveness of our stories and our story of change is the extent that we're able to connect the story we're telling with the story that someone would is living and would like to receive.
Mm-hmm.
So what I often tell when I teach leadership is to tell the story of change from the other side,
Mm-hmm.
to make that bridge from the other side. And related to listening, there's really two disciplines. One is we need to first release our own story. So in order to be an effective listener, in any situation, maybe it's about AI adoption in organizations. Now, leaders are very excited about the technology, especially technology leaders, and they can tell very elaborate, sometimes maybe too technical
Mm-hmm.
stories about the technology. But that's not living in the story of the rest of the organization. The rest of the organization is facing the story of anxiety, of job insecurity, and a sense of intimidation by this new technology.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so if leaders can start the AI adoption story from that and make the bridge to the other side and acknowledge that there's fears, there's anxiety, there's an insecurity, and then bridge that to their story of where they see the promise and hopes of technology,
Mm-hmm.
that is an effective story about change and one that would bring people along. So that's where listening happens. That's the critical role of listening. The quality of storytelling, especially in organizations, is dependent on the quality of listening.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone can tell a story, but an effective organizational story is one that requires listening to be able to tell the story starting from the other side.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what let's talk a little bit about, your work. As you mentioned, it's not only about listening. You're focusing specifically on this area of listening that is often neglected, which is listening to organizational pain. So can you
Mhm.
explain to everyone what organizational pain is?
Yeah, where I've come to organizational pain is starting with teaching a lot in change management and particularly in the recent years with this nonstop disruptive technological change. And what I'm seeing is despite the promise and the capacities of our technology to help people in organizations, there's a lot of resistance. And the resistance starts with our this story of our leaders are not understanding where we're struggling. They're not understanding that we're already overwhelmed. We cannot take on more. We're tired of this change. And the story really hasn't stopped from the pandemic. Change has been relentless
Mm-hmm.
past the pandemic. And so, what I've been hearing from the organizations that I'm working with is there's a lot of pain that's not understood, that's often neglected. And one of the challenges for leaders is leaders tend to be isolated at the top. Pain often sort of gets cleaned up as it goes up organizational levels.
Mm-hmm.
And so truly leaders don't really understand, most often do not hear the front lines of pain, where the pain points are and the friction is. And so where I feel this is really important in our time is for leaders to be attuned to pain in order to make those shifts and changes that they aspire to in their organizations.
Yeah. What you said is a really good point that often leaders it can get diluted as it bubbles up, right? I can also see certain scenarios where it could be avoided, where maybe there is a recognition that the organizational pain exists, but the act of digging into it versus avoiding it seems overwhelming,
Yeah.
or all of these other things. And so it's tricky, right? Because, as you were mentioning with the bridge between those two stories, it's really where it comes from.
Yeah.
So avoiding it ultimately is it's not going to work,
Yeah.
as I'm sure you well know. So let's talk
Yeah.
about one of the suggested antidotes and this practice of painstorming,
Yeah.
and what you've learned about how it can improve change leadership. So first, can you talk about what it is, and then how does it help?
Thanks. Thanks, Sarah. I really like your point about how, pain gets avoided. in organizations. So it's not only that leaders are isolated or pain gets cleaned up as it goes up the organizations. Uh, there's really two dynamics to why leaders tend to avoid pain. One is pain is often treated as a or received as felt like a criticism,
Mm,
like when we hear frontline employees who are experience friction or frustration at the current system. It can be received as criticism. So one of the reasons why often leaders avoid these painstorming or conversations about pain is um, that it's the capacity to receive what is they view as criticism. What I often tell leaders in terms of receiving that is even sometimes where they disagree, they think that that's not a rational point for what someone is making, is that that is the truth for any person. Whatever you're hearing is the truth to a different person. There are multiple
mhm,
truths about our organization, and so one is in order to move change forward, one is to listen, to validate those experiences, and try to understand it from the other side. The second reason why pain is often avoided is it does sometimes feel like listening to pain or working with pain slows things down. An analogy is like if we're on, a hiking trek, a group of five, and say one of us is leading the trek. Now, if someone's starting to feel pain, maybe an ankle pain, a knee pain, now if we're very focused on the destination, we try to just push the group through, and sort of sometimes we're so focused on the goal that we ignore, that signal of someone is in pain,
mhm,
and but that doesn't work. The trip will not make we may not make it through because if we don't attend to that, that member, we're going together as a group towards that destination. Now, so that's the same in organizations. Sometimes we're so goal focused that we ignore the pain that's happening that actually will eventually undermine or prevent us from reaching that destination. So sometimes it's important for leaders to attend to the pain and acknowledge that things will slow down by
mhm,
attending to that pain, but it will eventually help us get to that final destination. And that's where painstorming comes in because most of your listeners might be familiar with brainstorming.
mhm,
It's taught as early as in K to 12 education that it's human nature. We love to generate ideas, especially true with leaders. Love to focus on solutions. To problems. And that's what brainstorming is like coming up with the best solution for a possible problem.
mhm,
The problem with solution focus is just like the hiking analogy is where we sometimes in organizations get so focused on the solution that we don't see or hear the problems that might be coming up.
mhm,
And sometimes when we might be so focused on the wrong solution that if we don't hear the problems, we're not able to pivot to the right ones. And so it's important to have brainstorming together with painstorming. And I would actually argue that painstorming is more important than brainstorming because if we do not understand the problem, we're creating solutions for the wrong problem.
mhm.
And so it starts first with having a clear-eyed reality of what's on the ground. And so I'm happy to speak more about what painstorming, how can it be done, what the process is. But just love to introduce to your listeners the importance of painstorming in parallel with brainstorming.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's almost a precursor to brainstorming, right? If you're
Yeah.
understanding what the pain is, if you're open to hearing that, then you're able to brainstorm much more effectively. So, what does that practice look like?
Yeah. So painstorming is a practice of starting with the problem first. And or even before that, understanding the lived reality of where we're at.
Hmm.
Um, and so one way to break it down in a really practical way, I use the acronym for PAIN to guide an individual conversation or a team conversation on painstorming. And this acronym of PAIN starts with P for priorities, A for anxiety, I for inertia, and N for noise. P, we start with priorities. So everyone comes to work with a job to be done. They want to come to work to accomplish something, to feel competent and to feel connected. So that's priorities. And so with the brainstorming process, we first start with what are the jobs that we want to accomplish? What are what priorities do we have around the room? Do we have a clear sense of priorities? And often the pain starts to surface with the P, where we start to see competing priorities. The two pains often with priorities are people have priorities are not aligned. Often the strategic priorities of the organization might be different from the priorities that people have. The second problem, which is equally important, is priorities are often not clear. Jim Collins, the author of the book Good to Great, says that if you have more than three priorities, you don't have any.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the challenges I often hear in organizations. People can have a laundry list of priorities. They don't know, people on the front lines don't know what the real priorities are. And that
Mm-hmm.
creates a lot of pain because if we don't know where we're going, then there's going to be a lot of frustration. The sense of feeling lost in an organization is a strong sense of organizational pain. I'll
Mm-hmm.
just stop here for with the first part of brainstorming, which is kind of around the priorities
Yeah.
piece. Got to, yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense. And Jeff, I was just thinking, an example from within our audience that we've talked about is for service organizations, service organizations have become more focused on the customer experience and
Mm,
they're looking for ways to, maintain, not only retention, but loyalty, but looking for ways to expand maybe into new service offerings, et cetera. And so they're asking their technicians to pay closer attention to these customer experience related things. But many times they're still measuring their performance, their actual KPIs are haven't always been updated to reflect that. So maybe,
yeah,
they're being told how important the customer experience is, but then they're measured on the number of jobs that they're able to get to per day.
yeah.
So they're at odds with, we're saying this is important, but we're incentivizing you to prioritize, you know, being quick versus
Mm.
building that relationship. So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that's right. So sometimes our priorities are not aligned. We say we
Mhm.
want to put the customer experience first, but our organization systems are not aligned to that. So it's a big conversation. The priorities conversation alone could be one meeting. It depends
Mhm.
on the scope of time. Ideally, actually, it's to sequence, to start with priorities, to focus on that, and everything comes after. But we need to first have our priorities aligned, and that reduces a lot of pain
Mhm.
in an organization.
Okay, great. So if we think about some of the others, I guess, is there anything to point out with anxiety, inertia, and noise? Sort of just like you said with pain, like or priorities, some of the things that come up, like are there commonalities that you see with anxiety, inertia, or noise?
Yeah. So anxiety is an important conversation. So once we start with the P where we're aligned, if we think about say a conversation of what's quite top of mind today is AI adoption
Hmm.
in organizations. And so we have the conversation on priorities and people are aligned to now they see the benefits of incorporating generative AI in their work. Uh, but even though our priorities are aligned, underlying that, there are anxieties around that.
Hmm.
People may feel they may not be skilled up to take that on. People are worried now they believe in the technology, but they worry like if I'm going to train this tech LLM, I might be training myself out of a
Hmm.
job. There, I'm so should I actually do that? So there's one thing to know what's important. Then the second is what are the human anxieties behind that? Now we can break down anxieties to three fundamental human needs. People have the need to feel competent in their work. People have the need to feel connected to others, and people have the need to feel that they have some control
Hmm.
over their work. So one way to think about anxieties, because anxiety is a very big word, is to look at that. Like, do our so maybe staying with the example with AI adoption, do our employees do they feel skilled in that work? We can talk about that. Does that work make them feel more connected and secure in their role? And finally, do they have some sense of control that they're not re people, they're ultimately some sense of control is a fundamental human need. So
Hmm.
people need to feel that they're in control, even they're using sort of a superior intelligence in their work. So having that conversation around anxiety, it's not just about having everyone on the same page, but it is a very strategic question to think about too in
Hmm.
any change initiative.
Yeah. Okay, really good. What about inertia?
So inertia is it's looking about what we have that might prevent us from change.
Hmm.
So it's where the new rubs against the old. And so there's systems, for example, inertia comes up a lot of times when we change a new workplace systems. So there's things that we are comfortable with that gives us
Hmm.
security, that gives us predictability. What would be enough to make someone take the leap from comfort, security into the unknown and some level of insecurity. So we need to put just acknowledge that on the table. Like oftentimes with painstorming, again, why leaders often avoid that is they focus so much on the new and not have the conversation of the old. Like people do feel a sense of loss and comfort with old systems. So it's to put that on the table. Like what do we currently have that we are currently doing that might prevent us from taking on this change?
Hmm.
So it's a conversation of, yeah, what do we currently have? What do we currently value? There's a lot of value that in current systems. So we want to have a conversation about that. Again, we may not resolve everything, but the first step is actually just acknowledging it. That's, I would say, half the battle won with change is to acknowledge
Hmm.
the realities that employees face in the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So then what about noise?
Yeah, so noise is the fourth piece on top of all of this priorities, anxiety, inertia. Noise is now, as we move forward with change, we need to have a clear signal of where we're going. And that is a particular challenge now. We're living in an age of overwhelming, if not, it's not going to change. It's
Hmm.
overwhelming information. And the leader's job is actually to manage that information. It's to help people have signal from noise. Why it's part of the painstorming process is noise is painful for for employees when they have they don't know where to go. They don't know how to differentiate the signal from noise. And that's the role of leadership to really present clear signals. So again, it's thinking about our message of change and to Jim Collins' point, that if you have more than three priorities, you don't have any. For leaders to really narrow down, what are the 2 to 3 priorities we need to focus on with that change, and
Hmm.
also to sequence that for the organizations. I often use a 30, 60 day, 30, 60, 90. What is our top priority for the next 30 days?
Hmm.
And then midterm is 60, and then beyond that, with 290 or beyond. But most important for most employees is what's our 30-day priority? Like what's something that we're all working together and pulling together towards. So differentiate signal from noise is an important conversation.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I was thinking too, particularly on the inertia point, one of the things that I think we haven't gotten as good at as we need to in everyday life, but certainly in organizational change, is we're constantly looking for what's next, what are we going to add, what are we going to do differently. We're not as often as we need to thinking about what can we remove, right? And so I guess that's
Yeah.
inertia and noise. It's we keep building, but we're not as often as we could looking for what can we eliminate, what can we streamline, what can we simplify,
Yeah.
and being conscious of how that creates a lot of overwhelm in and of itself. But I like your point as well about the leader taking the responsibility of that staging so that it isn't all of the information about all of the things at one time to the point where the employees feel like they don't know what comes first, or they're very stressed, or they start to have that just fatigue about change. If you
Yeah.
can make it more digestible by focusing on, what are the priorities for the next 30 days, the next 60 days, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so that's a really important point about what leaders can remove,
Hmm.
the role of leadership in removing things from the process that because too many things creates anxiety, too many things creates inertia, too many things
Yeah.
create noise. That's a great point, and it just makes me think that the human nature it tends to be additive. We tend to
Hmm.
like to add value, add new initiative, and often leaders associate change with adding something like
Yeah.
here's something new, here's a new initiative, new technology, a new project. But in order to take on something new, we need to take away something. And I think where I'm hearing a lot of overwhelm in organizations is people are feeling like it's added and added and added, and it comes to a point we just cannot do 150%. They are
Right.
beyond capacity. And so yeah, to your point about removing, I think that cuts through the whole storming conversation. Leaders need to consider, well, priorities, what might we need to take away in order to
Hmm.
do more? With anxieties, to what is creating an anxiety? What should we reduce? Same with inertia and noise. So I think the
Yeah.
point with removal is like leaders. It's the leader's role to reduce friction, and reduce friction may mean removing certain things
Hmm.
to in order to alleviate some of the pain.
Yeah, absolutely. So so thank you for sharing what the four pieces of this are, and what that looks like. I guess, what I'm thinking about is what are, other than not thinking enough about the idea of organizational pain and how to listen to it, what are the common missteps that come into play in this painstorming process?
One of the common missteps with Painstorming, as well as in general when I see organization discussions, is jumping too fast to the solution without understanding the real problem. And as you said, like the real problem might be reducing something. So again, the human nature is wired to solve problems by adding.
Hmm.
And so if we're wired to solve problems by adding, as soon as we hear a challenge without fully understanding, we might jump to the solution.
Hmm.
And it's even harder for experienced leaders because the more we know, the harder it is to listen. We're quick to jump to, here's a ready solution. I've been there before, so here's what we're gonna do, without truly understanding the reality. So I would say the general principle is, especially with more experience, is to slow down in order to speed up.
Hmm.
The more experienced we are, often we tend to be very quick to solve. And I think we need to reverse that or balance that with a bit of a slowing down to back to I think where we started. Like, do we understand the challenge from the other side? I
Hmm.
think that's the criteria to move on to solution is, can I articulate this problem from the other side? If I can, then we can find some next ground in terms of where the story goes with the solution.
Hmm.
But if we're unable to fully understand what's going on, then we might be just creating a solution for not the real problem that's at hand.
Yeah. Um, when you said that, it made me think, this process, like any process of gathering input and feedback, can't be done performatively, right?
Mm,
So this isn't something where you can pretend to care about what the pain is
yeah,
just to open the opportunity to offer the solution you've already decided that everyone's going to take, whether they like it or not, right?
yeah.
So it's this idea of understanding and believing in the value of going through this process, and then
Mm,
doing it with genuine intent, not
yeah,
as sort of a checkbox exercise to, make it seem as though you want to understand what these problems, anxieties, all of these things are, and then, just jumping to what the solution is. I think that's really important to think about.
Yeah, like the word you mentioned, performatively and genuine listening. I hear that. I'm currently doing research on town halls and how town halls are organized and received in organizations. And a lot of town halls feels like it's a performative exercise. People are saying that, our leaders already have an agenda. They're listening, but they really have an agenda to push. So whether one is on the receiving end or one is preparing for a town hall, so think about that town halls are supposed to be listening exercises
Mm-hmm.
to really understand what's the pain and the challenges on the ground and to connect where we're going with that. So to leaders, I would suggest like if at least from what I'm hearing, most people already come into a town hall thinking that it might be a performative exercise, that to really flip that to have genuine listening. Now, it's not possible to address all the concerns in something like a town hall or even a one-to-one. But the difference between genuine listening and performative listening is just one word. I think it's to validate what one hears.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, I hear from leaders, well, I don't agree with what I'm hearing. And so if I'm listening to all of this, and if I'm validating that, I'm just kind of giving in or like going with a perspective that I don't agree with. Validating is not agreement. Validating is I hear you and I hear you seeing this in this way. And one can add, but this is what how I see it. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, leaders need to make hard decisions. But the starting point is I validate your perspective. Here's my perspective, and here's where we need to go.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that can be the same for town halls. The reason why it feels performative is the validation is missing.
Mm-hmm.
So after a town hall, sometimes the practice is to now we've heard you, we've heard these concerns, and here's where we need to go. But the concerns are not appropriately clearly validated. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
often the difference between performative and genuine listening is validating what one hears.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, the reality, like I think you kind of said this earlier, this isn't about understanding everyone's different aspects of pain and solving every single bit of it, right? There's
Yeah,
this really crucial aspect of that people want to be heard. They
yeah,
want to feel, like you said, heard and validated. They want to know that you care enough to listen.
yeah.
I don't think there is often an expectation that every pain voiced will be magically eliminated, or that every idea shared, must be adopted in its, initial form. There's just part of, I guess, the process itself, when done genuinely, is valuable, let alone the insights that can come out of it.
Yeah, that's right. So leaders may not be able to solve all of the pain points. That would be a perfect ideal organization. And the image is like we're going on a journey together. And think about a trek and going on an adventure. Different members of our group may be in pain. And we're humanly not possible. We have medical tools, but it's humanly not possible to take away that pain. But the
Hmm.
worst scenario is to push on without looking and attending and acknowledging that pain. Now, that member of the party that is in pain will be more motivated to go together with the group if that pain is acknowledged and there's some attention
Hmm.
to that. And so, using that analogy again, I think leaders sometimes focus too much on the destination and not realizing that attending to that pain can actually make the move towards change more effective and actually more sustainable.
Yeah. Yeah. What are the benefits? Like, what have you seen in action come from this process when it's done well?
Yeah, so when it's done well, ultimately it is about so the main thing with change is it's not one person leading the change. We need to mobilize our organizations around change. So in the listen and build process that I teach is about having leaders identify a change initiative that they want to do and having listening conversations with, we map stakeholders who are related to that change and to have listening conversations around that and to come together to create that plan for change. I say that listening creates the raw materials for change. So connecting the change story with the pain that's in the organization, the hopes, the aspirations of key stakeholders.
Hmm.
Often what's surprising when leaders conduct this is one is they realize that there's some friction that they did not see or did not hear. The second is they connect with some aspirations that they didn't hear. That here's a resource for change that people are really excited about this aspect of the technology, and the leader was focused on a different aspect of technology. So connecting with both people's pain points as well as their aspirations. Is something that I've seen in the listening process. It creates the raw materials for change.
Hmm.
So that's what I'm seeing. That then it gives the leaders these stories and building blocks and real connections with what motivates people to move that change forward. The final piece is actually the listening itself builds connections and alliances with the stakeholders to move them forward together with the leader for that change.
Yeah. I'm thinking about there's a couple leaders that I've had on the podcast. There's two that come to mind right now. One is James Milet. We did a podcast a while back about just what he's learned about leadership. And then there's another gentleman that Tim, who we did a podcast when he retired, kind of reflecting on his career. And I'm thinking about both of those conversations. So James talked a lot about his inclination and really learned skill to always dig for root cause, right? So he and sort of echoing part of what you're saying, which is the tendency is to hear a problem statement and jump right to solution
Yeah,
without really digging in further. And what you can learn when you go beyond that initial identified problem or opportunity is really where you get so much helpful
yeah,
context. Tim talked about the way he viewed his role as a leader, which to your point was really paving the way and eliminating some of that noise and inertia by, he said, I would find a problem, a pain,
yeah,
figure out what to do about it, do it well, dig into the next one
yeah,
because there's always something there, right? And his role was to identify those pain points and solve them one by one by one
mm,
forever.
yeah,
And so I think it's interesting that there are, even without this helpful, framing of
yeah,
painstorming, there are leaders that are doing this process really well.
yeah,
And, in my mind, those are two people within our ecosystem that are, incredibly well respected. They've built wonderful relationships. They've had great careers and they've impacted a lot of people. And a lot of that is, as you mentioned, this process is not just effective in identifying what solutions will work best. It's
hmm,
effective in building
yeah,
connection and trust and relationships, which
yeah,
ultimately is what leaders need to be focused on to successfully lead change. I think, less or at least equally important as the solution is the
yeah,
relationship. If people
yeah, it
trust
is.
you, if people
Yes.
feel that you care, if they feel
Mm,
validated,
yeah,
they feel respected, they're so much more likely to buy into what the solution is and embrace it than
yes,
if it's just, shoved at them and
yeah,
and they feel they haven't had a role to play. So I think that's a really
yeah.
important point.
Yeah, it is, and it's quite prevalent also. I think sort of the business serving industry is has created a lot of solutions,
Hmm.
and I know your listeners might resonate with this. Like I often hear like people, my leader goes for a conference, my board of directors they have this new idea, and but without fully comprehending and understanding the problem. So like people go get a new solution and try to tag that in fixing a different problem. And often, like with listen and build, one of the challenges I start with is the build trap, that we're building things that people don't really need
Hmm.
or want. And that's the challenge with a solution intensive industry where there's so many solutions that people just want to buy apply the newest solution.
Hmm.
And so that example you gave of Tim, was it Tim, the
Hmm.
leader that you worked with, to really understand the root cause, it starts
Hmm.
with listening to understand problem first, like what is the problem that we're trying to solve,
Yeah.
and what is the appropriate solution for that. But unfortunately, other leaders flip it and they
Hmm.
try to find a problem for the solution that they're
Yeah.
so fascinated with.
Yeah. And that actually brings me, Jeff, to the final point I wanted to talk about, which is how this framework and this practice applies to something top of mind for everyone, which is AI adoption. Because I can't think of a more relevant example of solutions abound,
Yeah.
a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz, and a lot
Mhm.
of leaders, quite frankly, who I think feel pressure to adopt AI because it is, quote, the next big thing,
Yeah.
not necessarily understanding exactly where best it fits. So, what have
Yes.
you seen about the value of this process specific to AI adoption?
Yeah, that's right. So one thing that's with AI adoption I often hear is like, well, there's an AI chatbot that could do everything. And so replacing a lot of our interfacing conversations with an AI chatbot. And I don't know if your listeners resonate with this, but certainly there are certain things that do not need an AI chatbot. People still need a human
Mm-hmm.
on the other end. And so this is where it's a build trap. It may seem like a sophisticated technology and certainly could do the job that it could do, but people don't want that. People don't have a problem with the existing system, so why tag on a solution to a thing that,
Yeah.
doesn't really solve the problem? So I think the same with AI adoption is to start with the problem first instead of think about the solution, because it
Mm-hmm.
is a very fascinating solution, very compelling solution. But what are the problems we're trying to solve with AI? And can this problem be solved? Should this problem be solved with a technology like AI, or can it be solved with better collaboration? So we think about silos in our organization.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long-standing human problem. And so oftentimes organizations think, well, if we have this new knowledge management system,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to have a shared truth, a shared reality. But the problem still remains. People are still not sharing information despite the capacity of that system. So the fundamental is we need to understand the problem. And often the problem is our human operating system
Mm-hmm.
we need to work with that first. And so, yeah, to AI adoption, it's really, yes, to acknowledge the potential of that technology, but the fundamental first question is, what is the problem that we're trying to solve?
Yeah.
And can we solve it first? Is it a collaboration problem? Because what I'm hearing and seeing is that a lot of the coordination collaboration problem gets tagged on with a collaboration technology, but people end up not using it.
Yeah. It's a really interesting point because I think in where we are in the landscape of technology today, I think often the solution is in some way technology plays a part in the solution in
Mm.
many instances.
Yeah.
But the issue is we tend to put too much weight on the technology's part of solving a problem.
Yeah.
And we place far less weight than we need to on adoption, which comes
Mm.
back to everything you said. You know, you may have a quite capable, sophisticated solution that maybe even fits the problem quite
Yeah.
well. But when you haven't done any of this process and you're just handing it to people as the be all and end all of their problems,
Yeah.
if they haven't bought into that, then they're not going to adopt it. They're not going to use it, right? And
Yeah.
so there's this need kind of like we said, to go through this process, not only to properly identify what the pain is to make sure the solution is aligned,
Yeah.
but also to bring the humans that you need on the journey and to have them feel validated and part of the process.
Yeah.
The only other thing I would say, because it's come up a lot, and I think it's really important for leaders to be considering right now, is that when we think of the acronym, the PAIN acronym, anxiety around AI is so high,
Yeah.
and leaders need to be especially aware of that because, at least for our audience, I think in reality, yes, there are aspects of jobs that AI can and will do, et cetera, but most of our audience has huge challenges right now to bring in as much human talent as they need. So,
Mm.
however much AI can ease that burden, it's
Mm.
not going to be replacing, field technicians fully or anything like that. So, I
Mm.
think we as leaders think about it as a solution, and we fail to acknowledge and keep in mind that it is something that causes a lot of intimidation and
Yeah.
anxiety, maybe more so than some of the other technologies that we're considering or whatnot. And I think it's just really important to keep that point in mind.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Like, it's not about the technology, but it's the adoption piece that
Hmm.
requires human leadership. So like you said, the technology could solve the problem, but we're working with human beings who are intimidated by change, who need to feel competent, and so that's the role of leadership, to really focus on the human side of technology. And I think that leadership, it's going to be very hard. I don't think it's possible to be replaced by AI. There's this perspective that resonates with me, that there's one thing that AI cannot do that humans could do, which is the human connection piece, because AI hasn't been broken in the way that humans have. And
Hmm.
so we can understand what it means to be fearful, what it means to be intimidated, to feel insecure. AI is a super machine, so
Hmm.
it doesn't know that level of fear, intimidation, and brokenness that humans can connect in that way.
Yeah,
That level of empathy still, I think, plays an important role, if not more important role, as AI does our technical jobs, that the human connection piece will be increasingly more of what leaders need to do.
I agree. Jeff, thank you so much. Where can our listeners find more about the painstorming process that we've talked about today and the work that you do?
Yeah, so I have an article on how painstorming helps leaders drive change.
Hmm.
So if they look up painstorming and change, you'd probably be directed to that article. Those set of articles resides on a Psychology Today blog, which I
Okay.
update. I'm starting to put out articles there. So there are a couple of articles there around painstorming, around there's a recent piece I wrote on the reality delta, help leaders understand the realities on the ground. Happy to connect with anyone on LinkedIn. Occasionally, I share connected resources there. I think that's one way that we connected, and now we're
Hmm.
here together on the podcast. So, yeah, happy to connect, folks. So, if you look up Jeffrey Yip on LinkedIn, we can connect in that way. Um, so, really just enjoyed our conversation, and just the experiences that you've had, as well as your conversations with leaders around this ongoing, if not getting harder,
Hmm.
challenge of leading and organizing change.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with everything you said about, these skills are only becoming more important. So,
Mm.
really appreciate you coming on and sharing. We'll make sure we link your LinkedIn and the Psychology Today in the episode so folks can find that easily. And yeah, really glad to have you. So, thank you for spending the time with me today.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah.
You can learn more by visiting the home of the unscripted podcast at futureoffieldservice.com. The podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more at ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.